All right. Scott Wallace Baker was named Australia's biggest Agatha Christie fan in 2013. He has filled his home with groupings of objects in tribute to all her 80 books and some of her plays. Are you all able to see the first slide? Scott, you can unmute yourself. Just let me know if you're able to see the first slide.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So Scott is going to show off his tributes and other items of interest and give us some tales from his lifetime of collecting. So I am going to turn it over to you now, Scott.
Thank you, Jackie. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Scott, and I am a collector. And I always have been from a child. I just love weird things. Now, these slides that you can see here, what they basically are is items that I've collected over the years. And I've grouped them together to create tributes to each of the books and collections of short stories. And as Jackie said, some of the plays as well. And this all started, this particular task for myself started because on rereading the books, although you would get the gist of everything, you might think, as I did, now I wonder what a tube of tablets looks like, or I wonder what a dictaphone in the 1920s would look like. And naturally with the internet, things were so much easier to acquire these things. And as I say, I love weird things. So I loved accumulating these particular objects. And then when I realized I had enough to actually create a tribute for each and every one of the books, that's what I decided to do. Are these slides scrolling, Jackie? Because this one looks like it might be stuck.
Oh, I've started the slideshow. Which one are you? Okay.
I'm stuck on the Parker Pine one.
Okay.
The joys of technology. Here we go.
Okay. Let me start that again.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
And this one, of course, is A Murder is Announced with the shepherdess lamp. I'm probably not going to talk too much about the particular tributes. They'll just play in the background so that you don't have to just watch me talking. You've got something interesting to look at as well. But what I'm going to talk about is a few of the things that happened to me in the collecting world, which hopefully you'll find as fun and interesting as I did. So as I say, that's what I did. I decided to group them together to create the tributes. And as I say, I've always been a collector, even though when I was growing up, I really didn't have a lot of a lot of money. In fact, I still don't. But when you're a collector, you somehow make things work. When I was a child in high school, I was absolutely fascinated by Tom Adams and his covers for the Fontana paperbacks. And I just loved them. I loved them so much that I would photocopy them. And back in those days, there was no color photocopying. It was all black and white. And then I would color them in pencil. And back then, if you had told me that one day I would have 5 of Tom's original paintings and I would meet him and get to know him as a friend, I would never have believed it. And sadly, he passed away in December last year and he's greatly missed. Such a dear fellow. I met him for the first time at his exhibition in Torquay, and he welcomed me with open arms, literally, and invited me to stay at his house with him and Georgie, his wife. So as I say, I've got 5 of his original paintings now. That actually came about as a result of me starting up a website devoted to Tom's artwork. I got contacted out of the blue by someone who had a number of his paintings, and the question was, did I know anyone who would like to purchase them? And I said, yes, actually I do, me. And then I had to somehow find the funds to make it happen. I got to meet the fellow who sold them to me. He lives in New Jersey, just a short bus ride from New York. I got to meet him in 2007, and he showed me the one painting that he was not willing to sell, which was the second Fontana cover for Destination Unknown, with the toad and the leper. And he said to me, I am never parting with this one. A few years went by, and then he contacted me again, and he said, would I be interested in purchasing this one as well? And I thought, oh dear, what has happened? I didn't want to pry, but I thought, he said he would never part with it. And the price he was asking actually was ridiculously low. I said, why are you asking for so little? And he told me, well, it's the global financial crisis. And I said, well, don't worry about that. It hasn't really affected us here in Australia. And I said to him, I'll only buy it from you under 2 conditions. And those conditions were that I pay the same price as I paid for the others, and that when he's in a position to, he can buy it back from me. Now, when I told my dad this, of course, he was furious with me because I basically talked the price up, something you're not supposed to do when you're the purchaser. But I thought, I have to put myself in his shoes, and I've got my conscience to live with. So that was the 4th one I purchased, and the 5th one actually came up on eBay. And that gave me a bit of a moral dilemma on my hands as well. The seller I did not know, so I didn't really have a conscience issue there, as I did with this fellow in New Jersey. But the crisis I had on my hands was, oh, I wonder if other people I know are interested. I wonder if they're going to bid as well, and then I'll bid, and we'll, between us, drive the price up. So I did put my feelers out, and I asked a few people if they were interested. And also Tom said to me that he had gratefully parted with some of his paintings over the years. So I put it to Tom first. Do you want to buy this one back? And he gave his blessing to me to purchase it. The seller had actually put it down on eBay as a Tom Adams illustration, whereas it was an original painting. And so I think for that reason, I might not have had the competition that I thought I might have. So that was the 5th one I purchased, and I'm just so incredibly thrilled to have them. Another thing that I'll mention, an interesting item in these tributes, is the sugar hammer from Mrs. McGinty's Dead. Ever since I read that book, I was so curious, what on earth does a sugar hammer look like? It's described as having a bird on it, and I think in the book it mentions jewels for the bird's eyes. But otherwise, unless you knew, you wouldn't know what it looks like. I think a lot of this stems from the fact too that Agatha Christie probably never really thought that people would be reading her books 100 years later. So she probably didn't go into a lot of detail about what particular things look like. For example, the 1920s dictaphone, Why would she need to describe that in detail when people from the 1920s would probably know what it looked like? Whereas people born in the 70s, like myself, we wouldn't really know. And it's interesting to think too that when David Suchet's version of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd was released, the dictaphone in that film was really not right for the era at all. It looked much more modern than the 1920s version. But back to the sugar hammer, I was determined to get my hands on one. And this was the first year that I traveled to Torquay with my friend Toto, who many of you would have met. And we planned on having a stop in Venice and in Paris. And also in Dubai. In Dubai, actually, we had a camel ride in the middle of the day, and I was dressed in a suit and tie, quite mad. But while we were in Dubai, I thought, I'm going to see if I can get my hands on a sugar hammer. So I went to the souks. Toto wasn't interested in going, so I went on my own and asked around. No one in the souks in Dubai seemed to know what this sugar hammer was. So I left it. Then our next stop was Venice. And I found that there was a Persian art dealer in Venice, so I went there. Now, they didn't have one, but the owner of the shop said to me, oh, go to the big antique store in London. They'll have one. And he said to me, just ask the fruit seller on the street. They'll tell you where the big antique store is. So that sounds quite mad. But with that little bit of information, I was able to find this antiques emporium. It's called Gray's, and there's lots of little stalls, all owned by different antiques dealers. Because of that, you couldn't really just ask one person. You had to walk around and ask lots of people if they had one. And we came across this stall, and I said to Toto, I'm just going to ask here. And he said to me, oh, no, he won't have one. Anyway, I asked, and the fellow reached underneath his counter and said, oh, is this what you mean? And I said, yes. Now, he probably noticed my desperation and asked for far too much money, but I managed to talk him down a little bit by offering cash. And finally, I had my hands on a sugar hammer. Then our next stop was Paris. Now, we went there on the Eurostar. That was fine going there, but coming back, and of course, all your luggage on the Eurostar is hand luggage. And coming back, the suitcase is on the conveyor belt, and it stops, and they call me over, and they say, what is this? What's it called? Where did you get it? What is it used for? And I said, oh, I just collect things in Agatha Christie books. And for some reason, this day, I was quite smart, not my usual self. And I managed to stop myself before I said, oh, and it was the murder weapon. Which was so lucky, because had they confiscated it, which they were certainly thinking of doing, I would have cried after all the trouble I went to find this sugar hammer. I'm going to show you at the end of the slideshow too, something else that I acquired recently and has been in the news in the last few days. And that is the gown that Diana Rigg wears in Evil Under the Sun, the red beaded gown when she sings You're the Top. Now, this was auctioned earlier this year by Prop Store UK. They had an estimate down for between £500 and £700. It ended up going for £2,500 because I was determined to get it. And then, of course, on top of that is the buyer's premium and also the shipping costs. Now, I'm used to paying a lot of money for shipping because living here in Australia, you just don't have a choice. If you want something, you just have to pay for shipping. But when it arrived, it was lovely, but yes, it did need some restoration. So I had to spend some more money on having it restored by Grimwade Conservation. But it's absolutely spectacular, and I'm so thrilled to have it. You may have noticed too, when I was on camera earlier, I've got a lovely brooch on my lapel. It's what's called a giardinetto, which is a little basket of flowers made out of jewels, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, and opals. Now, this was actually Agatha Christie's brooch. It was auctioned in the Greenway auction in 2006, which at the time I knew nothing about. So I didn't bid on anything at the Greenway sale. I had no idea that it was actually happening. But since then, I have managed to acquire a few pieces from that sale. The lady who bought the brooch at Greenway, she subsequently moved to Australia, and she and her husband are about to go into a retirement home. So she decided to sell all of her jewelry. So it was auctioned at an auction house here in Melbourne. The estimate for this brooch was $6,000. Now, it's about 70 cents to the dollar US. And if you double it, that's what, if you halve it, that's what it would be in pounds. $6,000, I thought, oh yeah, I can afford that for something so special. Because what this lady found out after purchasing at Greenway is she came across so many photographs of Agatha Christie from the 1950s onwards wearing this brooch. So it obviously was a favorite brooch of Agatha's. She's also wearing it on photographs, in photographs on her 80th birthday. Now, I went along to the auction. It was before the pandemic really got terribly bad. So I was there in the auction room, and two other people were interested. There was one on the telephone and one on the internet. And the price went up to $30,000. And that was my bid. I just kept bidding. I don't know why. But luckily, $30,000, the two other interested bidders dropped off. And I was numb, completely numb. The auction room erupted in applause, and I just quietly snuck out of the room. And I thought, what have I done? What have I done? Can I still afford to go on my holiday to the Middle East? And on top of the $30,000, there was also the 22% buyer's premium. So I'm wearing a brooch that's worth $30,000. And today and yesterday are the first times I've worn it. It's very, very precious. I don't know if I paid too much. How do you put a price on these things? I really don't know. A couple of other interesting things I have in my collection. It's not really a terribly interesting story when you buy a first edition, for example, from a secondhand book dealer. So there's no interesting story there, but I have got 5 of the Mary Westmacots, and they're signed by either Mary Westmacott or Agatha Christie, or some of them are actually signed by both. I also have a copy of The Road of Dreams, which is a self-published poetry book Agatha Christie had published in the early 1920s. What makes my copy interesting is it was her sister Madge's copy. It's got her name written in pencil, Madge Watts. So that's very precious. Another first edition I have, which I treasure, is After the Funeral. And the reason why I treasure it is because it's got Agatha's signature in it, but she's dedicated it to her secretary and confidant Carlo Fisher. Now, another book that I treasure is the second book Agatha Christie ever wrote, which is The Secret Adversary. It was published in 1922, I believe. And the reason why it's so precious is this one is also signed, and it's got a dedication in her hand to a Mr. Coleman. The way I acquired this book is from a secondhand bookshop here in Melbourne that was going out of business. They had finished their lease after 40 years. They were closing down and everything was half price. So instead of $2,000, they wanted $1,000 for it. Absolute bargain. Again, I had to somehow come up with the money, but when you're a collector, you just make things happen. This book had me really intrigued. I thought, who is this Mr. Coleman? And there's stamps in the book. It's got the London Stores, London Library, London Stores building stamped in the book. So I contacted the London Library and I said, is this your stamp? Do you know anything about this book? And they said, no, that's not our stamp. And about a week went by and it turns out that one of their staff was as intrigued about this as I was and looked into it without my knowledge and then contacted me and said, you know, there's a London Stores building on the corner of Burke and Elizabeth Street in Melbourne. And I thought, oh, you would think I would have known that. So it was stamped by a shop in Melbourne and I found it in Melbourne. Agatha Christie was here in 1922. So it's quite possible that this book never left Australia. I came across something else interesting too. In the book that Matthew Pritchard compiled of Agatha's letters home, which is The Grand Tour, marvelous book. Although I must say I was disappointed to read when Agatha Christie said about Melbourne, well, one city is much like another. So that wasn't terribly gratifying. But there in the book, there's a passenger list and photographs of fellow passengers on the boat from Cape Town to Adelaide. And on one of the photographs, it has written underneath, Mr. Coleman. So I think that's marvelous. I think that's just wonderful that this Mr. Coleman met Agatha Christie on the boat and got her to sign this book. And she wasn't famous then. She'd only written the 2 books. It's really interesting too, because if you try and research anything about what she did in Australia, apart from what she wrote in her letters home, there's really nothing that you can find out because she wasn't here as an author. She was only here in the capacity of wife. So I think that's really fascinating. Amazing to think that so very few people know that she visited Australia and New Zealand. So I hope that those little anecdotes about my life of collecting have been interesting. Have we been all through the slides yet, Jackie? Have we been through them all?
I can advance them. I'm not sure exactly where we are. Would you like me to just flip through the rest?
Yeah, perhaps. I suspect we might have run through them all.
I think there are a few more.
Oh, there's the sugar hammer.
Oh, all right, great timing. Okay.
Oh, and you might see behind that sugar hammer too, although it's hard to make out in that photograph, that there's a maquette of the monument, the West End monument for Agatha Christie.
Oh, wow.
And that is because I met the sculptor and I asked him if he had miniatures to sell, because you can purchase miniature bronzes of the bust in Torquay. He said that he did, and he's probably not allowed to, but then he said, oh, I think I've still got the molds to make the maquette with. And as far as I know, the only other person who has a maquette is Matthew, because he got to keep the original one. The maquette was made to show to the to London City to get their approval. So if you've been through them all, I might just switch to my iPhone so that I can show you.
That's it. That's the last one. I remember that one. What is that one?
That is actually a late one, so it's not actually with the photo of the rest of it, but it's for Destination Unknown. It's the hand that glows in the dark, which is part of the story.
Very good. All right, we've been through the slides then.
Yes, how are we going for time?
You have time if you want to show us the special purchase.
Oh, thank you. I'll just go to my iPhone now. If I can bring up Zoom, and we don't want to do what we did earlier and have that horrible echo. So I'll make sure that I mute myself on the computer.
Just remember to unmute yourself on your iPhone.
Now you should be able to hear me. Oh dear.
Yeah, there's a little echo.
Yes, I'll move away from the computer. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, I've left it on the computer, so you shouldn't have that horrible echo anymore. Sorry about that. Now I can see you on the screen, Jackie. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, I think I want to turn it around. There. Okay, so we're just going into my dining room now. Okay. And there's Diana Rigg's gown. And I'll also show you the Tom Adams paintings. I hope the lighting in here is all right. So this one is Remembered Death, which is the American title for Sparkling Cyanides. And over here is The Clocks, which again, it's the American. Looks like there's a little bit of a reflection there. I'm sorry about that. Can you see it all right?
The bottom, we can see the top. There's a reflection there.
Oh, and of course, here's the Diana Rigg mannequin with the hairstyle. And over here is Dead Man's Folly. Now, when I had these photographed for Tom's book, he said to me, "Why are there so many reeds covering Marlene?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. if you have a look at, oh, here's the paperback book, and see, you can see Marlene there. She's got no reeds covering her at all. And if you have a look at Tom's book, the first one he published, the Agatha Christie cover story, there's a few reeds covering her. And in this painting, there's lots. So it's a bit of a mystery as to where all those extra reeds came from. Over here is a Caribbean mystery, and that's the one that I got on eBay because the seller did not realize it was an original painting and thought it was just a illustration. And I'll go around the dining table. My whole house is like this, by the way. All those tributes I showed in the slideshow, they're all on permanent display here. So my house is full. And this is the one for Destination Unknown with the toad and the leper, which is the one that the fellow who sold it to me, he said he would never part with. So I'm only looking after it for him. One day he will acquire it back again, I'm sure. So thank you for joining me, and I do hope that some of what I had to say was of interest. And I think we need to get ready for Jamie's play now, don't we?
Yes, thank you very much, Scott.